It was just another freezing evening in January 1950. The streets of Boston were quiet. Businesses were closing, and nothing seemed unusual. But behind that calm winter night, 11 men were about to execute a plan so precise, so calculated, that it would go down as one of the most extraordinary robberies in American history. They weren't reckless criminals chasing quick cash. They were patient, organized, disciplined. For nearly 3 years, they had studied their target, memorized routines, rehearsed escape routes, and built alibis strong enough to withstand intense scrutiny. And in less than 35 minutes, they would steal the equivalent of more than $30 million in today's money. This is the story of the Great Brinks Robbery, a crime that looked perfect until one man decided he'd had enough. In the 1940s, the Boston depot of Brinks was considered a fortress. The company specialized in armored transport and high-security storage. Its building in Boston held enormous sums of cash, checks, and financial documents. The vault sat on the second floor, secured behind multiple locked doors. Armed guards were always present. The system relied on strict procedures and discipline. To most people, the building was untouchable. But Anthony Pino saw opportunity where others saw impossibility. Anthony Pino was a small-time criminal with big ambitions. He wasn't known for masterminding historic crimes, at least not yet. Around 1947, he began quietly gathering information. He observed delivery schedules, guard shifts, employee routines, and even small details like lighting patterns. He wasn't rushing. He was preparing. Eventually, he realized something crucial. If this was going to work, he needed more than courage. He needed a team he could trust, men who understood silence, loyalty, and patience. One by one, he assembled his crew. Among them were Joseph McGinnis, a respected figure in the local underworld, and Joseph O'Keefe, a tough and unpredictable associate. Others joined, each bringing a specific role: muscle, logistics, getaway driving, surveillance. 11 men in total. Each had a task. Each understood the stakes. The planning phase was meticulous. They managed to enter the building secretly on multiple occasions before the actual robbery. Instead of forcing locks or damaging property, they removed lock cylinders one at a time, copied the keys, and returned everything exactly as they found it. No alarms were triggered. No suspicion was raised. It was patience at a professional level. They stole a green 1949 Ford stake body truck to use as their primary escape vehicle. They rehearsed their getaway route repeatedly, driving the streets until every turn felt automatic. They even coordinated detailed alibis, ensuring that during the critical time window, each man could claim to be somewhere else. Disguises were carefully chosen: navy pea coats, chauffeur-style caps, gloves, and rubber Halloween masks that concealed their identities completely. They postponed the operation several times, waiting for the ideal moment. There would be no improvisation, no chaos, no panic. Finally, on January 17, 1950, they decided the time had come. Shortly after 7 p.m., the men gathered in Roxbury and drove toward their target. Once inside the Brinks depot, they moved with calm efficiency. The employees on duty were quickly restrained. Hands were tied, mouths were taped. The robbers spoke very little. There was no unnecessary violence, no shouting. Just controlled execution. Behind 5 locked doors, they reached the vault. In approximately 35 minutes, they filled bags with over $1 million in cash and hundreds of thousands more in checks and securities. Then they were gone. The truck disappeared into the night, following the pre-planned route. Within minutes, it was abandoned and dismantled. Pieces were disposed of separately. The men split up, stepping back into ordinary life as if nothing had happened. When authorities arrived, they were met with silence and confusion. The employees couldn't provide clear descriptions. The robbers' masks had concealed everything. Investigators found little evidence beyond some tape, a mask, and minimal physical traces. It appeared to be a flawless operation. But what made the robbery even more strategic was the legal timing. Under federal law at the time, the statute of limitations for the crime was 3 years. Under Massachusetts state law, it was 6. If the robbers could remain undetected for 6 years, they could never be prosecuted. The clock started ticking the moment they walked out of the building. For years, the investigation continued. The FBI pursued leads, traced serial numbers, and interviewed suspects. Brinks even offered a substantial reward for information. A few stolen firearms connected to the robbery were discovered near the Mystic River, but they were too damaged to provide useful forensic evidence. Gradually, certain names began circulating in investigative circles. Patterns emerged. Some of the suspects had questionable alibis, particularly around the narrow window between 7:10 and 7:30 p.m. on the night of the heist. Yet there was never enough concrete evidence to bring charges. By January 1953, 3 years had passed. The federal statute of limitations expired. The men were halfway to permanent freedom. But freedom is fragile when trust begins to crack. 2 members of the crew, including Joseph O'Keefe, struggled to stay out of trouble. They committed additional crimes and were eventually arrested on unrelated charges. While serving time, O'Keefe began writing letters to other members of the group, demanding financial support for legal fees. At first, the others complied, but over time the payments slowed. Resentment grew. O'Keefe felt abandoned. The unity that once made the operation possible began to erode. Then things escalated. In 1954, O'Keefe was kidnapped briefly by associates connected to the group. Soon after, he survived 2 separate assassination attempts. In one incident, gunfire shattered his windshield. In another, he was shot in the chest but miraculously survived. The message was unmistakable. He was no longer part of the Brotherhood. He was a liability. Eventually, O'Keefe was arrested again for parole violations. While in prison, federal agents continued to visit him. They applied pressure carefully and persistently. For years, he said nothing, but isolation has a way of changing perspective. By late 1955, the 6-year deadline was approaching. The remaining suspects believed they were almost safe. Only days remained before the statute of limitations would protect them forever. On January 6, 1956, just 11 days before that deadline, O'Keefe made a decision that altered history. He agreed to talk. He detailed the planning, the participants, and the execution of the robbery. With his testimony, authorities finally had the evidence they needed. On January 12, 1956, arrests began. Members of the crew were taken into custody one by one. Indictments followed swiftly. The nearly perfect crime had collapsed just days before legal immunity. During the trial, most of the men received life sentences for armed robbery and additional years for related offenses. O'Keefe, having cooperated, received a much lighter sentence. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was the money? Authorities recovered only a small portion of the stolen cash. In one instance, police in Baltimore discovered currency whose serial numbers matched those taken from Brinks. Additional funds were found hidden behind a wall panel. But the vast majority, over $1 million in 1950 currency, was never recovered. Some believe it was quietly spent over time in small amounts to avoid detection. Others think it may still be hidden somewhere in New England, waiting to be discovered. Over 70 years later, the missing money remains one of the enduring mysteries of American crime history. The Great Brinks Robbery stands as a powerful reminder that even the most disciplined plans can unravel from within. It wasn't forensic science or brilliant detective work alone that solved the case. It was human weakness, distrust, pride, survival. 11 men executed what many still consider one of the most carefully planned robberies in history. They defeated security systems, evaded investigators for nearly 6 years, and came within 11 days of permanent freedom. And yet, in the end, it wasn't the vault that failed them. It was loyalty. But here's the question that still lingers. If more than $1 million was never found, is it possible that somewhere, buried in an attic, hidden inside a forgotten wall, or resting beneath New England soil, a piece of that legendary fortune is still waiting to be uncovered?